He is 19, and I was 62. The passage of time could not hinder my spirit. He entered the scene just as the rain ceased its relentless patter. As I stood in the kitchen, my hands drying on a towel, the sound of the front door creaking open reached my ears, accompanied by the unmistakable rustle of someone shaking off the water from their jacket. I assumed it was my husband, returning home earlier than he typically does. Yet, in that moment, a voice reached my ears, deeper, more youthful, one that had not echoed through these walls for years. I turned, towel still clutched in my hand. He appeared, changed, carrying himself with a new sense of purpose that spoke of the years he'd spent finding his path. There was a warmth in his presence, a quiet recognition that seemed to see me not just as a wife or hostess, but as the person I'd always been, stirring memories of my own past. He embraced my husband first, a strong hold, mirth dancing in his voice. It had been almost 3 years since their last encounter. I lingered, arms folded across my apron, uncertain of how to welcome him. Yet as he faced me, his smile remained steadfast. He stepped forward and gave me a warm hug, the kind that felt like reconnecting with an old friend. "You haven't changed at all," he said with a kind smile, his words carrying the comfort of familiarity. And even though I understood it wasn't true, time has a way of etching itself into your very essence. I sensed something stir just beneath my ribs. The evening meal passed without incident. My husband inquired about his job and his journeys. I attended to the needs of those around me, replenishing their glasses and offering responses when prompted. I noticed him, relaxed in his chair, his expression thoughtful as he glanced my way, not with the familiarity of a child, but with the curiosity of someone seeing me anew. Once, as I set a dish on the table, our eyes met briefly, and his steady gaze carried a quiet understanding, like a shared memory. For a moment, I reached into my drawer and pulled out an old dress, one I hadn't worn in years, its soft fabric a reminder of a younger, more vibrant self. I held it briefly, then folded it away, a pang of nostalgia tugging at my heart. He occupied the guest room. It was adjacent to our wall. As I reclined in bed next to my husband, who had succumbed to slumber, I gazed at the ceiling, attuned to the echo of footsteps in the distance. He remained awake, perhaps engaged in unpacking, perhaps wandering restlessly. I imagined him sorting through old photos or unpacking his belongings, his movements steady and familiar, a reminder of how much he'd grown. It stirred a quiet longing, not for him, but for the parts of myself I'd lost along the way. The next morning I dressed with care, choosing a favorite dress I hadn't worn in years, its familiar fabric lifting my spirits. I reached for an old bottle of perfume, its scent stirring memories of brighter days. During breakfast, my husband hardly paid any attention. He sipped his coffee while perusing the headlines on his phone. As he descended, his hair still glistening with moisture from the shower, a towel casually draped over his shoulder. He took a moment to pause. His eyes met mine briefly, a familiar warmth in his expression. "Morning," he said, his voice calm and friendly. "Did you rest well?" I asked, keeping my tone even. He smiled. "Hard to sleep with the smell of fresh coffee filling the house. It's like coming home." Heat surged to my cheeks, an involuntary pull at the corner of my mouth. My husband remained engrossed in his screen, oblivious to the world around him. The remainder of the morning slipped away in a haze of light-hearted chatter, various tasks, and a grocery list I meticulously jotted down with an attention to detail that seemed almost excessive. I remained occupied, my hands in constant motion, my feet shifting with purpose. Yet, the persistent hum beneath my skin remained unyielding. I kept thinking about his kind attention, the way it reminded me I was still seen, still valued. It wasn't about youth or flattery, but a quiet recognition that made me realize how much I'd missed feeling truly noticed. As the afternoon light filtered through, I strolled by the ajar door of the guest room and caught sight of him, engrossed in his sketching, had lowered, eyes intent on the pages of his notebook. He remained oblivious to my presence. Perhaps he did, after all. Yet, he kept it to himself. In that hushed instant, a sense of reverence enveloped the air. I remained concealed, observing the cadence of his pencil, the subtle quiver of his lips, as he erased a line and meticulously redrew it. Later that evening, following our meal, my husband took his leave to indulge in a program on television. I sat at the dining table, sipping the last of my wine, when he walked in, holding a book, his presence familiar and calm. "Too quiet for you?" he asked, with a small smile. "Sometimes silence is just right," I replied, and we shared a moment of understanding, like old friends catching up. With a nod, he placed the book aside and filled a small glass with wine. Neither too close nor too distant, it was just the right amount to create a sense of shared space between us. Later, as I reclined in bed, I found myself wide awake once more, this time not burdened by shame, but rather filled with a sense of unease. A current surged, palpable and undeniable, an ascent unfolding before the senses. And the most terrifying aspect wasn't the thought of making a mistake. The thought of rediscovering myself felt strangely liberating, like a door I hadn't realized was still open. The hardest part wasn't what might happen next, but knowing I'd already begun to see myself differently. As the wind whispered against the window, I realized that thoughts of his eyes would linger in my mind come morning, or perhaps the subsequent one. The most challenging aspect wasn't the potential outcomes. It was the awareness that something had already transpired. It unfolded unexpectedly. The very first thought that crossed my mind in that instant was this. It was neither orchestrated nor anticipated, and certainly not something I had prepared for that morning. Honestly, I'd started paying more attention to how I dressed since he arrived. Nothing flashy, just small choices, a favorite sweater, a brighter scarf that made me feel more like myself, like I was rediscovering a spark I hadn't noticed in years. For days had passed since his return. For serene evenings of dining. For mornings spent sharing fleeting glances over steaming cups of coffee. For nights spent beside my husband, absorbing the muted cadence of his voice filtering through the wall. Engaged in conversation with someone on the other end of the line, or simply humming to himself as he brought his sketches to life. On that particular morning, my husband was scheduled for a doctor's appointment. It was nothing of consequence, merely a matter of routine, an occurrence he failed to mention, until the moment he was already reaching for his keys. From the hallway, I recall observing him as he rummaged through his pockets, absent-mindedly patting his coat, his gaze sweeping the room with a sense of calm detachment. As he raised his gaze to meet mine, I offered a smile, and he returned it, though it lacked the warmth that should have illuminated his eyes. "I'll be back around lunch," he remarked, already halfway out the door. I nodded, wishing you a safe journey. And then he vanished into thin air. The silence that enveloped the house was dense, not stifling, but perceptive. I made my way to the kitchen, engaging in a ritual of tidying, wiping down counters that were already pristine, folding tea towels that had been neatly arranged just the day before, and gliding a cloth over the immaculate surface of the sink. In the stillness of the house, a floorboard let out a soft groan from somewhere above. In the dim light of the garage, I discovered him. He knelt next to the weathered bicycle, my husband's, working to adjust the chain back into place. His hands were slick with grease, a telltale streak marking his temple where he had carelessly swept his hair back. At first, he was oblivious to my presence. With his sleeves rolled up to the elbows, the muscles of his forearms flexed as he turned the pedals slowly. His eyes narrowed in deep concentration. I ought to have departed. Instead, I crossed the threshold. How bold of you to tackle that challenge, I remarked with a hint of levity. He raised his gaze. His expression melted the moment our eyes met. I suppose I had managed to justify my presence in some way. A moment lingered, not unpleasant, yet heavy, with an unspoken weight. He rose gradually, his hands brushing against a rag that bore the marks of time. As he pivoted, the illumination from the solitary window behind me highlighted the contour of his jaw, the silhouette of his collarbone visible through the delicate fabric of his t-shirt. Would you like to grip the handlebars as I secure the bolts? He inquired. I inclined my head, my voice eluding me. I moved in closer, grasping the rubber grips, my fingers grazing his for the briefest moment. His hands radiated warmth, their roughness a testament to hard labor, pulsating with a vitality I hadn't experienced in years. We toiled in quietude, or perhaps not. Quite quietude, to be precise. The soft murmur of air filtering through the window, the delicate chirp of a bird in the distance, the sporadic chime of metal meeting metal. The warmth of his body pressed against mine was palpable, the gentle graze of his shoulder as he leaned closer, and the intoxicating blend of soap, oil, and a hint of earthiness filled the air. And then I slipped from my hold. The handle lurched as he twisted the bolt with too much haste, and without thinking, he grasped my hand with one of his, while the other anchored the bar in place. In that fleeting moment, we found ourselves mere inches away, sharing the very air between us. Apologies, he whispered. I shook my head, yet remained still. His gaze locked onto mine, and for the first time, I found myself unable to look away. His fingers remained entwined with mine, and I sensed the quiver beneath his skin. Perhaps it belonged to me. The details of who made the first move have slipped from my memory. Perhaps neither of us truly did. For a moment we stood close, our hands brushing as we steadied the bike. There was a quiet understanding, a shared pause that felt like reconnecting with someone who saw me for me. His hand lingered briefly on mine, warm and steady, before we both stepped back. He was the one to break the silence. I ought not to have. I interrupted too quickly. Everything is all right. It's merely inconsequential. We find ourselves weary, isolated. He inclined his head in agreement, gradually. Yet, neither of us made a single move. As I finally turned and stepped away, I could feel the intensity of his gaze searing into my back. My legs wavered beneath me. My breath caught, torn between reflection and a quiet unease. It was a feeling I hadn't faced in years, so unfamiliar I almost didn't recognize it, a yearning to reclaim the person I used to be. In the kitchen once more, I scrubbed my hands, hoping to wash away the moment that clung to my skin. Yet the tingling lingered within my grasp, within the confines of my chest, in the hushed throb that lingers behind my knees. During that evening meal, I deliberately averted my gaze from his eyes. My husband spoke of lab results and cholesterol, unaware of the tension crackling just 2 chairs away. The table seemed inadequate in size. The illumination is excessively intense. Later, alone in the bedroom, I opened my drawer and found an old journal, its pages filled with dreams I'd long forgotten. I ran my fingers over the worn cover, tracing the outline of a woman I hadn't thought of in years. I did not apply it, not at this moment. Yet I also failed to return it. The dawn that followed was enveloped in an unsettling stillness. A distinct silence lingers in the aftermath of an irreversible act, not the serene variety but the weighty, subdued kind, as if the atmosphere is charged with anticipation, just moments before the tempest unfolds. I navigated the rooms with the awareness that the very walls might be listening. I steered clear of the guest room, I found myself lingering in the kitchen, absorbed in the rhythm of cooking, even when there was nothing left to create. The gentle clatter of porcelain, the soft, persistent hum of the refrigerator fills the room. The sound of chair legs scraping against the floor. The cacophony around me felt amplified, a stark reminder that yesterday had indeed unfolded. He remained upstairs, absent from the breakfast table. That was quite peculiar. From the moment he arrived, he claimed the table each morning, leisurely sipping his coffee while my husband still slept. We had become accustomed to those brief moments of stillness. Casual conversation regarding the weather. Headlines in the newspaper. At times, we exchange a knowing smile in response to my husband's antiquated humor. Yet this morning, the expanse before me lay vacant, the chair unoccupied. I reassured myself that it was for the best. Perhaps he had departed ahead of schedule. Perhaps he felt a twinge of regret. Perhaps I ought to consider that as well. However, I chose not to. That filled me with dread. By the time the sun reached its zenith, my husband had departed for a meeting with a client. The unmistakable sound of car doors echoed, his voice fading into the distance of the driveway. Once more, silence enveloped the space. Not the burdensome sort this time, but rather one filled with anticipation. Electrified, as if suspended in time. He was there in the backyard, perched on the weathered bench under the sprawling magnolia tree, a sketchbook resting on his lap. He remained focused on his task, yet an awareness of my presence lingered in the air. His pencil hesitated, lingering in its motion yet refusing to come to a halt. I lingered behind him, arms folded, caught in a web of uncertainty, questioning my choices and the reason I hadn't simply remained indoors to engage in the rational actions of a sensible woman. Imagine. Yet, I had no desire to feign. He flipped the page. The rustle of paper brushing against paper sent a jolt through me. At last he found his voice. If it becomes too peculiar, I can take my leave. I remained silent for a brief moment. The breeze whispered through the branches, allowing a handful of petals to cascade gently onto the grass beneath. It's already peculiar, I remarked, and I was taken aback by the steadiness of my own voice. Yet I find myself wishing you would stay. His expression was neutral, neither a smile nor a frown gracing his features. He nodded slowly, as though tucking that sentence away in a hidden corner behind his ribs. Later that day, as I meticulously dusted the bookshelf in the living room, my fingers brushed against an old photo album, nestled between tax folders and outdated cookbooks. It emerged from me, a reflexive action born of pure instinct. Within the confines of the space, photographs from a family gathering we held years prior adorned the walls, capturing the essence of his inaugural Christmas after being embraced by my husband's son. In a single image, he stood at the periphery of the frame, scarcely 13, arms folded, a solemn expression etched on his face. In the backdrop, I found myself pouring cider, laughter bubbling forth, my hair casually gathered in a loose bun, feeling younger than I had recalled in that fleeting moment. A peculiar symmetry lingered. Within it, how we had once been fragments of the same photograph, woven into the same narrative, yet divided by the relentless march of time and the constraints of roles imposed by others. I softly closed the album and carefully placed it back in its original spot. Yet the image lingered in my mind. That evening, my husband returned with an unexpected delight. He summoned me into the living room, brimming with the enthusiasm of one who believes they have achieved something remarkable. A gift bag from a beloved local boutique rested on the coffee table, a charming establishment I hadn't frequented in years, as its prices often seemed a touch extravagant. I eased it open, taking my time. Within lay a delicate pink cashmere cardigan, luxurious tender to the touch, carefully selected, yet utterly misplaced. He wore an expression of self-satisfaction. "You're always cold," he remarked, believing this might provide some warmth. A smile graced my lips. I expressed my gratitude to him. I pressed my lips gently against his cheek. Yet within me, there lingered a peculiar sense of deflation. His intentions were good. Yet, it was yet another expression of concern. Even in my absence, I felt no chill. I felt an intense heat coursing through me. Every fragment of my being that once lay dormant was stirring, limb by limb, and no cardigan in existence could bring solace to that awakening. Later that night, as I tidied up after dinner, I caught sight of the guest room door standing slightly ajar. The angle of it, the way the hallway light spilled in, the shadow it cast, compelled me to pause. I lingered for a moment, then rapped gently on the door before easing it open. He sat on the floor, his back resting against the wall, a sketchbook cradled in his hands. He raised his gaze. There was no smile, no salutation. "Thank you," I uttered, uncertain of why those particular words came to mind. "What is the purpose?" His voice carried a gentle, subdued quality. "For reminding me of my presence." He gently closed the sketchbook and placed it aside. "You are never invisible," he said, locking eyes with me. "You have simply faded from view." A hush fell in the wake of those words, lightweight, relaxed, yet complete. I refrained from crossing the threshold. I remained at a distance, yet I did not turn my back either. The following morning, I adorned myself with greater purpose. Silence reigns. Merely a snug sweater that embraced my waist, accompanied by jeans that served as a gentle reminder of my curves. I brushed a hint of blush across my cheeks and spritzed on the perfume I had long neglected, the fragrance that once evoked memories of late dinners and champagne toasts. During breakfast, my husband remarked on the weather. He inquired whether I required anything from the store. I gently shook my head, cradling my coffee cup as I savored the quiet moment. As I glanced across the table, his familiar presence stirred memories of years past, reminding me of the bonds that tie us through time. I once overlooked the allure of lingerie stores. They consistently seemed like uncharted realms, areas crafted for a younger iteration of myself, one that still regarded silk and lace as rewards to be earned, rather than mere echoes of nostalgia. That afternoon, I wandered into one of those quaint boutiques nestled between a wine shop and a nail salon. I found myself without a specific aim in mind. I reassured myself that I was merely perusing, that it stemmed from curiosity, a fleeting fancy. Yet my fingers were aware of their desires. They glided past the hangers, with an innate grace, brushing against the fabrics, gauging their heft. I paused upon discovering it, dark plum lace adorned with satin straps, exuding elegance and subtlety, not intended for the eyes, but rather for the senses. I pressed it to my chest for a moment, not before a mirror, but simply against myself, hidden beneath my coat. My heart raced with an intensity that felt almost unmanageable. I purchased it without having the chance to try it on first. Upon returning home, I donned it in the bathroom on the stairs. The door remained unlocked. My husband was absent from the house. The lace embraced my skin tenderly, encircling my ribs as if it were a whispered secret. I stood before the mirror, my gaze wandering over collarbones, shoulders, the curve of hips, neither judging nor critiquing, merely observing, as if reconnecting with a woman I hadn't conversed with in ages. It transcended the mere pursuit of beauty. It was a matter of reconnecting with my body, not driven by vanity, but by a deep yearning for touch, for sensation, for the reminder that I was more than just a functional silhouette drifting through a house. That evening I wore the dress with a renewed sense of purpose, its familiar fabric reminding me to embrace the day with confidence. I remained silent with my husband. We were enjoying a casual diner at home, nothing too formal. He likely wouldn't have observed even if I had donned pajamas. He noticed. He arrived for dinner a few minutes behind schedule, his hair still glistening with moisture from a recent shower. The table was being set, candles flickering softly, a gentle melody wafting through the air. One of those jazz playlists my husband favored, designed to cloak the silence in a warm embrace. Before he even crossed the threshold, I sensed his gaze upon me. There was a palpable shift in the air, a momentary pause, as if the world held its breath, anticipating something about to fall. He offered us a courteous greeting, took a seat, and praised the roast with kind words. Hardly a morsel from my own plate graced my palate. Our words never crossed paths directly, yet the tension lingered between us, an uninvited guest at the table, especially after my husband retreated upstairs, citing a headache or perhaps simply seeking solace in rest. The kitchen held me captive, drawing me in with its warmth and familiarity. I found myself engaged in the simple act of shifting spoons into drawers, adjusting placemats that were perfectly fine as they were. He entered, silent and deliberate. I chose not to look back. He rested against the doorframe. His presence enveloped me, long before his voice reached my ears. Your appearance tonight was strikingly unique. My hands came to a halt. In what way does it differ? He hesitated before responding. Then he said, love yourself. The side of you that remains hidden from the world. I pivoted to confront him. His expression was devoid of a smile. His expression remained a mystery, yet his gaze was unwavering, piercing through the silence. In that fleeting moment, the room seemed to close in around us. Not in a physical sense, but rather on an emotional level. All else faded into the background. The kitchen, the hallway, the weary ticking of the ancient clock perched above the sink. I strolled by him, heading for the stairs, my pace deliberately languid. His gaze lingered on me throughout the journey. As I rounded the corner, I took my time. I allowed him to gaze, not as a provocation, not as a playful jest, but as a revelation. In the stillness of the night, as we lay in bed, my husband extended his hand towards me. His hand grazed my side, beneath the blanket. Soft. Well-known. Perhaps a touch uncertain. It had been weeks since we last felt close. It has been months, indeed. He bore no responsibility for it. And yet, the instant his fingers brushed against my skin, I became utterly still. It wasn't a lack of desire for closeness, but rather that the warmth fell short. The pressure was amiss. The cadence unknown. I allowed him to proceed. I allowed the moment to unfold. Gaze fixed, contemplating the expanse of the ceiling above. My mind wandered to the guest room, where his presence reminded me of forgotten parts of myself, dreams and passions I'd set aside. Once the day had drawn to a close, my husband succumbed to slumber swiftly, his breaths deep and steady. I ascended softly, entering the bathroom and gently closing the door behind me. The mirror lay shrouded in a veil of steam, remnants of the shower that had just passed. I brushed a corner with my hand, gazing into my own reflection. My cheeks warmed with a mix of emotions, not from conflict but from the realization that I was rediscovering my own strength. And beneath it all, a lurking peril. The acknowledgement that I had traversed a boundary within my own being. The challenge lay not in the moment itself, but in rediscovering a part of myself I'd long ignored, a spark I needed to reclaim. I donned a nightgown, gathered my hair, nestled beneath the covers, and remained motionless, attuned to the subtle creak of the floorboards above the guest room. He appeared before me, sketchbook resting on his lap, thoughts swirling like a tempest, hands clasped. Behind his head, eyes wide and unblinking. He lay there, wide awake. I wasn't. Either. The journey was not one I had envisioned, at least not initially. I once alluded almost casually to my solitary trips to the coast, where I sought solace in the rhythm of the waves when I needed to catch my breath. It was a quaint beach. Town A. Mere 3 hours distant, lacking any semblance of glamour. A row of quaint local shops, a weathered wooden pier, a motel imbued with a lingering scent of salt and citrus cleaner. It had been more than 10 years since my last visit. During one evening's dinner, I raised the topic, perhaps as a test, perhaps as a gentle nudge to remind anyone that there remained corners of my mind untainted by the monotony of daily life. My husband failed to catch my words. Or perhaps he did, merely nodding, as he always did when I spoke of aspects of myself that he had ceased to acknowledge long ago. On the second morning that followed, I gathered my belongings into a weekend bag. I informed him that I required some fresh air, assuring him I would return by Sunday evening. He extended an invitation to join. I offered a smile and reassured them that it was perfectly fine, that this was a journey I wished to undertake on my own. He embraced it with an unsettling ease, and I ought to have experienced a sense of relief. Yet I sensed that familiar bitterness creeping back into my throat, the voice that murmured, "You are perpetually solitary, even in his presence." I kept my plans to myself. Not even he. The journey unfolded without incident, save for the way my fingers clenched the steering wheel with an intensity that felt excessive, and the frequency with which I glanced at the rearview mirror, far beyond what was required. The coastline emerged abruptly, reminiscent of memories surfacing in disjointed pieces. I found myself in the familiar lot, the very spot where I once spent countless afternoons lost in the pages of a paperback. The ocean remained as it always had. The breeze that danced through the open car windows was absent as well. The motel remained standing. The paint remains as chipped as ever. A brass key attached to a plastic tag. Chamber 7. The room carried the familiar scent it always possessed. Bathed in sunlight, the linen whispers of warmth, while the aged wood carries tales of time, and the faint scent of salt lingers in the air. I left the bags untouched. I placed my bag on the chair and chose to open the balcony door instead. The ocean lingered nearby, its essence palpable in the very air we breathed. I lingered in that moment, allowing the wind to weave through my hair, pondering the essence of an unspoken longing. His presence caught me off guard, a familiar face in an unexpected place. We shared a quiet moment, like old friends reconnecting after years apart. I hadn't anticipated that aspect. The late afternoon sun cast a warm glow as I stepped into the quaint cafe by the boardwalk, seeking nothing more than a comforting cup of tea. I lingered in line, perusing the menu, my fingers entwined with the strap of my purse. As I sensed it, that palpable stillness enveloping the air, the sort that occurs when a change stirs before the body can fully comprehend, I turned with deliberate slowness. Seated at the distant table by the window, he had his sketchpad unfurled, pen held at the ready. He appeared unfazed, simply serene. He rose to his feet and approached me with measured steps. "There are no inquiries." Without any facade. "What is the duration of your stay here?" I inquired. "A handful of hours." "Did you choose to follow me?" I recalled what you mentioned. Silence enveloped us for several minutes, our words suspended in the air. We merely occupied that table. The distant ocean beckons. The clamor of the cafe. A muted haze lingers in the air, overshadowing the tension that exists between us. There was no longer any place to conceal oneself. There was no masquerade. We were merely two souls sharing a space, bound by the whims of fate. This, whatever it was, had reached a turning point. Subsequently, we strolled along the shoreline, just out of reach, yet near, enough to sense the impending moment. The water felt more frigid than I recalled. The sky unfolded in a tapestry of clouds, adorned with hues of gray and lavender. The wind played with my hair, teasing it into disarray, and he leaned in, gently tucking a wayward strand behind my ear. His fingers grazed my cheek, pausing for a heartbeat longer than necessary. We stood close in the breeze, the salty air wrapping around us as the late afternoon shadows stretched long. For a moment, we shared a silent understanding, a connection that felt deeper, more certain, yet still fragile, like rediscovering a piece of myself through his presence. As we said our goodbyes, the warmth of my lips lingered. My breath snagged somewhere deep within my ribs. I refrained from offering an apology. I chose not to run. In the dim light of the motel room, I found myself gazing into the mirror, lost in thought for what felt like an eternity. My intention was not to evaluate the image before me. I had no desire for youth or solutions. I sought the truth reflected in my own gaze. For an extended period, I failed to acknowledge the woman gazing back at me, yet now her skin glowed with warmth, her lips gently parted, and the rhythm of her heart echoed fiercely beneath her ribs. She was irrefutable. That evening, I chose to dress simply, letting my hair fall naturally. I reached for an old sweater, its soft fabric a reminder of the comfort I sought in rediscovering myself.